All right, guys, if you are on the live stream, will you let me know if you can see me and hear me? Please put a comment below so that I know that everything is good to go. Give me a thumbs up, anything like that. Got 2 viewers on. Let's let a few more people hop on. And again, will you give me a comment below to let me know that you can see and hear everything and that everything is good to go? Oh. Yo from Keith Adkins. Akins? Is it Keith Akins? I think it's Akins. Awesome. Got a thumbs up reaction. I'll let a couple more people hop on. I don't think I'm going to have a ton of people watch this live today, simply because I'm doing this at 1 o'clock during a work day on hump day. But I'm assuming that people will play this back when they get a chance. I'm here, bro, from Kyle. Awesome, awesome. Yep, so if you're watching this live, you guys are part of the club, and if you're watching this at a later date, well, you missed out on live. I'm in George West filming my second hunt with an A7S III right now. Shouldn't you be paying attention to the hunt then and not a live stream? It seems like you're kind of missing out on the hunt if you're watching a live stream. Awesome. So I'm not going to wait much longer. I'm probably just going to go ahead and dive in since I know that most people are going to probably watch this later. So here's kind of what we're going to do today. I basically am just going to go over the A7S III. I'm going to talk about some of the buttons. I'm going to talk about the menu options, and then I'm going to kind of take you through and give you some of my recommended settings. This is going to be a little longer because there's a lot to this camera. I'm not going to cover every single little thing because A, there's not enough time for that, and B, there are a few things in here that even I don't know what they do, simply because it seems like a rocket scientist designed some of these menu options. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and talk to you about the most important things, the things you need to be paying attention to, what they do, how to set them up, that kind of thing. If you are interested in getting an A7S III, this will be a very informative video, kind of help you understand what it's about and whether to get it or not. And if you already have one, then this video should help you set yours up. And also, for those of you who are shooting off of A7 IIIs, A7R IIIs, A1s, FX3s, a lot of what I cover today will be applicable to your camera. Not everything will be, or not everything will be in the same place, but largely as a whole, a lot of the options will still be the same. So even if you have a camera other than the A7S III, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is going to cover that. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into the camera without further ado. So for those of you who are a little uninformed on what exactly the A7S III is, the A7S III is a 12 megapixel camera that is a photo video hybrid. It's technically a photo camera, but if we're being honest, it really was built with video in mind. The entire A7S series since the first generation has been that way. This is my favorite Sony camera. I've owned a ton of Sony cameras, more than I care to admit over the years, but this is my favorite, even more than my FX6 that I'm currently doing this live stream off of. And the reason why is this is an extremely versatile tool. If you gave me this and said this is the only camera I could have to shoot a project with, I would say okay. Because I know that I can, because this camera can do a little bit of everything, and it does a little bit of everything very well. From a photography standpoint, a lot of people shy away from the fact that it's only 12 megapixels. You shouldn't. You shouldn't let that affect you, because 12 megapixels is still a lot. 10, 15 years ago, 12 megapixels would have been a ton. Billboard ads are printed off of 1 to 2 megapixel photos. A lot of people don't realize that because it's blown up and you're looking at it far away. You can print banner ads with this thing. You can still crop in on it on your photos, and you can get really sharp, really crisp images even though it's only 12 megapixels. I've sold a lot of prints from photos I've shot off of this camera. So do not think just because it's 12 megapixels that it's not a good photo camera. I actually find that the photos have their own unique look to them. Part of it's just the way that the sensor renders the image, and another part is the fact that the images are always so clean. High megapixel cameras have the drawback of not being as great in low light. We've come a long way with that, and technology has gotten a lot better, and the A1 is a great example. It's a 50 megapixel camera that handles low light really well. But the low light performance on this is so clean that even though you may not have a high resolution, you're still going to have really good looking sharp files that are crisp, and they just have their own unique look to them. So do not think that you can't shoot photos with this camera, because you definitely can. It's a great camera for photography. From a video standpoint, that's where things really start to get good. I have been known to complain about Sony because this camera took a long time to come out, but they hit it out of the park in terms of video specs. One of my favorite things about this camera is that it's only 12 megapixels. When you look at ARRI cameras, they're not high resolution cameras. They are built on lower megapixel systems like this. So Sony took the low megapixel approach with the A7S III, the FX3, and the FX6, so that these cameras can absorb a lot of light and interpret and render an image in a very specific way. And it works out really, really well. I think that this camera can hold up to any high resolution camera out there, not because of the resolution it has, but just more of the fact that it renders such a beautiful image. And that's kind of what ARRI's been known for, and Sony kind of followed that path with these cameras. This camera shoots 4K up to 120 frames per second with autofocus the entire time. It shoots HD up to 240 frames per second. It works with the wonderful A7SIII 10-bit 422 codec, which is my favorite codec to work with because it's a codec that's really easy for the computer to edit. You don't have to worry about the computer choking on your footage because A7SIII is almost like editing with ProRes. I used to transcode all my footage to ProRes back in the day because my computers, even my really fast computers, would still get bottlenecked and would still choke on the codecs. These cameras, the FX3, the FX6, and the A1 and FS7, they all work off of a type of A7SIII codec, and so you can just literally shoot your footage, even 4K 120 for most computers, come home, drop it on a timeline, and get to work, assuming you have a fast drive, of course. And so A7SIII is amazing, and the fact that they finally put that in a camera like this really opens up a lot of doors. It is a 10-bit 422 camera, so you have a lot of range to work with in color grading. We'll get to color today. And it shoots at higher bit rates in A7SIII, which means it's going to retain a lot of information. One of the things, I bought an A7 III when I was waiting for this camera to come out because my A7S II, which was my main B camera, didn't have good autofocus, and I wanted that because it's a solo shooter. When you're running a gimbal or a slider and stuff like that, autofocus is really useful. The A7 III had a much better autofocusing system than the S2, so I bought it. But I hated that camera because it always overheated on me in critical moments. And on top of that, the A7 III only did slow motion in HD, and the HD footage was ugly. It was awful, full of aliasing, moire fringing, purple fringing. It just looked bad. It looked soft. I would never turn the footage from my A7S or my A7 III over to my clients if it was shot in slow motion because it just looked too bad. This camera fixes all of that. It's the best of both worlds. It's extremely sharp, extremely detailed, doesn't suffer from the aliasing and moire issues that the A7 III suffered from, all while not overheating and while retaining world-class autofocus. So it's an amazing camera. You could pick this camera up and you could shoot a variety of projects from YouTube videos and live streams like I'm doing with my FX6 today, down to doc projects. You could use it for those of you that are in the outdoor world, you could use it for outdoor projects. You can use it for all kinds of things, weddings, events, commercials. It can just do a lot. Is it the best camera in the world? No. I said in my podcast the other day that there's no such thing as the best camera, only the right camera. But for a lot of you, this could be the right camera. So that's basically a summary of kind of some of the things that are in this camera. So now I want to talk a little bit about some of the buttons, and then we'll go through the menu options. You'll notice on this camera that there is, and I'm going to see if you can kind of, I've got a monitor here. You'll notice that there is the upper dial. We'll start there. The upper dial has a movie option, followed by an S and Q, which stands for slow and quick. Then you've got custom 1, custom 2, and custom 3, which allow you essentially to dial in, like you could take custom 1 and you could set your camera up to 4K 24 with a shutter speed of 1/48 and set it and save it to custom 1. Then you could go to custom 2 and have it set to, say, 4K 60 with a shutter speed of 1/125 and then save it. And then you could go to custom 3 and you could save that to 4K 120, double your shutter speed and save it as well, so that when you're in the field, you can literally hop between frame rates by just spinning the wheel. That's just one example. You could have one of them set up for time lapses, you could have one of them set up for slow motion and the other one set up for sports photography. I mean, there's a variety of things you can do there. So those are just custom buttons that are custom settings that basically allow you to dial in your custom settings and just flick your dial and it will go to your last saved settings. It's really useful. The option we never go to is the big green auto. We stay away from auto. The one above that is going to be the letter P. The one above that is A, and the one above that is S. And those basically stand for like shutter speed priority, aperture priority, and basically what, like with the S, and I'm not going to dive into all of these because it would take all day, but if you go to S for shutter speed priority, for instance, the camera will automatically change your f-stop while you dictate what the shutter speed is. A is the opposite. You basically dial in your aperture or your f-stop and the camera will set your shutter speed automatically. A lot of people think that that means you're no longer shooting in manual, but you really are shooting in manual. You are just telling the camera, hey, if you're shooting an aperture priority, for instance, which I do for wildlife, if you go to aperture priority, you can set your f-stop to like f5.6 or f2.8 or whatever lens you're working with, and say, hey, I want to keep the f-stop here the entire time, and then the camera can adjust the shutter speed for you. So if you're swinging and following ducks and the lighting's changed, and you would not be able to maybe change the shutter on the fly, the camera can do that for you. And you can set minimum values of like, hey, I don't want the shutter speed to ever go below this, and if it does, crank up the ISO. And so it's still manual because you're still telling the camera, this is what f-stop I want, but you're letting it handle the shutter on the fly when you can't physically do it fast enough. So that's one example of when you'd use something like that. Above that is M, which is obviously manual, where you dial in everything. And then we're back to movie mode. I shoot in movie mode quite a bit, actually. I love custom 1, custom 2, and custom 3, and I do have my camera set up for 4K 24, 4K 60, and 4K 120, like I said earlier. But there is one quirk about the A7S III. In fact, all of Sony cameras, mirrorless cameras, have this quirk, which is, for whatever reason, when you are in a custom memory mode, you cannot set your white balance to a white balance card. It won't let you. So if you want to do a custom white balance to a white balance card, you have to go to movie mode or photo mode, which is really annoying. So what I will do a lot of times is I'll do the 4K 24, 4K 60, 4K 120 custom options when I'm working like an event and I'm just popping back and forth between them. But if I'm doing something like a commercial project where I want to really dial in my white balance perfectly and I don't mind going in the menus to change my frame rates, I'll go back to movie mode because I like to hold a white balance card in front of the camera and do a custom white balance. So I got hung up on my mic there. So that is one thing to be aware of. That's this dial. You'll see below that you have the this little dial right here, the exposure compensation dial. Essentially, that allows you to, if you're working with something like aperture priority, like that A mode I talked about earlier, your camera has to know how you want it to expose the shutter speed for you, and that's what this does. So if you want the camera to expose on the money when you're letting the camera set the shutter speed for you in aperture priority, for instance, you would set it to 0. That means you're wanting the camera to expose it right on the money. Well, what if you wanted to overexpose it or underexpose it because you want to protect the highlights? You would change this dial to like -1 or -2 or -3 or somewhere in between, and you're basically telling the camera, hey, expose the image for me because I'm shooting on the fly, like set the shutter speed for me, but underexpose it or overexpose it. And that's why I say you're still kind of shooting in manual when you use those modes. because you still are dictating all the settings. This wheel right here can be either your f-stop or your shutter speed. You kind of have the choice of picking which one it controls. In the menus, you get the option to do that. You have another wheel up here. That's the same thing. It does the f-stop or the shutter speed. You can reverse them, have one do shutter and the other do f-stop, or vice versa. So that's nice. Of course, you got the on-off button and the shutter button all in one. You've got the record button right here. You can, on the A7S III, set the record button to also be on the shutter button. I don't like the shutter release to be, personally, I don't like for it to trigger record, so I would stick with the record button just because I like to have one place and one place only for that. But you can do that. And then you have custom 2, which is basically a custom button option. You can put anything you want there. And these back here where it says AEL and autofocus on, those you can go with what's in the camera out of the box, but you can also, these are also custom buttons. And so like all of these I've changed for the most part and put in my own custom buttons there. C4, where the trash can is at the bottom, when you're reviewing a clip, that's how you throw the clip away if you want to delete it in camera, which I'm not crazy about doing, but you can if you want. But it's also a custom button. That's why it says C4. Obviously you have the play button down here. You have the FN button up here, which pulls up another set of menus, a different set of menus. It's like a quick menu. Above that, you have the joystick, which allows you to change autofocusing points or go through the menu systems, things like that. You have a wheel. The wheel can be customized. I use my wheel to change ISO. So if I'm in the middle of a doc project and I need to change my ISO on the fly, I spin the wheel and my ISO goes up or down however I need it to. You have a right button, a left button, an up button, and a down button. They all come preset, but you can, again, these are all customizable. So you can have the wheel and down and up and left and right all set to custom button options. The center of it can be used to like select OK on a menu system, things like that. And then over here, you got another custom button. It's crazy how much you can customize this camera. You got the menu button. And on this side, we have our card slots. Let's talk about cards for a minute. I run CF Express Type A cards. These are amazing cards. They are wickedly fast. I shoot on the biggest capacity they have right now, which is 160 gigs. I have 8 of these, 4 for my S3 and 4 for my FX6. That typically can get me through a day of shooting. They are a little pricey. They're 400 bucks a pop. And then you got to buy the card reader, which is like another 120 bucks. But they're awesome. They're made by Sony's Tough brand, which is, you could wash these in the washing machine on accident and it wouldn't hurt the card. They're amazing cards. I like them. It's just a little extra layer of security. I don't recommend you wash your cards and test it out, but supposedly that's what they can handle. And this 160 gigabyte card, when I say fast, what I'm saying is I can take this card and fill it up to the max and I can dump it to an SSD drive and back it up in 5 minutes. 160 gigs backed up in 5 minutes. That's a game changer. So think about it. You're out in the field, you shoot 3 cards in a day or 4 cards in a day, and you come home and you've got to dump your stuff before you go to bed in your hotel, and you don't want to be up all night. That's game changing when you can dump cards in 5 minutes. You could dump 4 cards in 20 minutes. I mean, that's nuts. So I love these cards. If you go with CF Express Type A, you unlock every single mode in the camera. If you do not go with this card, there are a couple of modes you cannot go with, and number one is you can't do 4K 120 at S&Q mode XAVCI. You can do 4K 120 with an SD card as long as it is a V90 card. How do I even know all this stuff? I don't even know how I remember all this stuff. It just comes out of my head. But you can, if you have a V90 card, you can run a V90 SD card and still do 4K 120. You just can't do it in XAVCI, which means you're probably going to want to transcode that footage later. I don't want to transcode. I want to be able to use S&Q mode, shoot it at XAVCI, come home, drop it, edit it, not have to worry about it. So I like these cards for those couple of reasons. But these card slots will take both CF Express Type A and SD cards. If you put both, like an SD card up top and maybe a CF Express Type A card down at the bottom, it's going to default to the slowest card simply because it wants to make sure that you're not filling up like the fastest card and the slowest card can't handle, you know, whatever setting you're using. So that's that. Also with the CF Express Type A cards, because they're so fast, let's say you're doing photography and you're shooting, this camera can shoot, I think it could shoot 30 frames per second in photography. I need to look that up. But let's just say you do shoot 30 frames per second in RAW. if you shoot in these cards, it will allow you to shoot for a lengthy period of time without filling up the buffer because it can write to these cards so fast. You have on this side a rotatable flip out touchscreen. Honestly, I think the Sony A1 is an amazing camera, but it is missing this, and I'm shocked Sony would, on their flagship, not include this because this is a game changer. I love this. If I'm live streaming myself like I am today, I would normally be using this camera, and I have it out in front of me, and I can see myself. Plus, if you're just like holding the camera at low angles and stuff, it's really nice to be able to swivel it around and pivot it and stuff. And Sony did something really smart here. A lot of manufacturers that put these flip out screens on cameras fail to put the headphone jack in a way that it's clear of this screen. And so some cameras, like my old Panasonic cameras used to be bad about this. You'd open up the screen and you couldn't rotate it because your headphone jack was right here. That is not the case with the A7S III because they smartly put the headphone, or not the headphone jack, microphone jack, sorry. They smartly put the microphone jack up here up top so that when you have a mic plugged in, you can still have full access to your flip out screen, which I think was really, really, really smart because I hated my microphone jack being below the screen. So that's a really good move by Sony. You have full-size HDMI on this side, which I really liked because I trust full-size HDMI cables better. When I go into the menus here today, I'm going to be using this HDMI cable to pull my menus up on my live stream. And I trust it. I trust that it's not going to fall out because it's not near as weak as the micro HDMI or mini HDMI. So I like full-size HDMI cables. I trust them a lot more. I still prefer to use SDI because I like the locking mechanism, but if you're going to go HDMI, this is the way to go. And then you have two more little flaps. You do have a headphone jack right here, and then below that you have a USB-C port, and then you have one of the multi-issue ports right here. And these are great because you can do things like you can plug this up with a USB cable and you can have this thing powered up all night long doing a time lapse. It's great. So I really like that. And so those are what those two ports are. On the bottom down here, you have the battery. The battery life on this camera is really, really good. So now that we've kind of covered all of that stuff, let's hop into some menus here. So let me pop out this nice rotatable screen. I'm gonna set my camera down. Guys, if you have any questions throughout today's process, ask me. Feel free to hop on and ask me, and we'll get to them. So I'm going to switch on over here. You should, here in just a second, see my camera settings. And what I'm going to do is now you're seeing what my camera's seeing, so you should see a couple hard drives that say, I'm a little close for the focusing here. You should see a couple drives there that say RRM SD11A. That kind of lets you know those are my hard drives. So anyway, now that we're here, let's go ahead and pull up the menus. So, oh my gosh, we got a bunch of comments here I didn't see. Love my A7S III. What's up, Victor? Yes, the 10-bit 422 is amazing. Blazing transfer speeds with them. You should do this for your FX6. Michael, if you pay me, I will do this with my FX6 today. So let's hop into the menu system here. So we're going to start off with, and for those of you that are coming from the A7 III, you're going to notice that the menus look different. The reason why they look different is because Sony finally changed up their menu system. They got tired of people yelling at them about their menu system, and so they redid it, and this is where we are, and it looks really good, and they definitely did a good job of simplifying things, and I really like this menu. It's my favorite menu of the Sony cameras. So what we're going to do is we'll go up to the star at the top. The star at the top is My Menu. You can have different My Menus. You can see I have one that says My Menu 1. You can have My Menu 2 and My Menu 3. You can do whatever you want there, but I typically just have one menu. And the reason why you might want to have multiple menus is that, let's just say you have different types of projects you do all the time. Maybe you live stream all the time, and then you have another, maybe you shoot at your church all the time, and then maybe you film weddings all the time, and you want to have different menu systems or different quick menus for all those different events. That's what this would be for. But essentially, this is a customizable menu. You basically go into your My Menu settings, and you can add menu items, and it just allows you to access your menus really fast. So you could go in here and add like auto slow shutter or ISO to your quick menu, and this would allow you to add that to your quick menu. And if you look here, I have a handful of things that I get to, I use all the time. One is the time-lapse settings, which we'll get to here in a bit. One is select Finder Mute monitor. If I'm shooting on a gimbal, I don't want the gimbal to accidentally turn the back monitor off and go to the viewfinder, which, by the way, the A7SIII has an amazing viewfinder. It is amazing. I love the viewfinder on it. I would buy this camera over the FX3 for the viewfinder alone. It's really, really good. But I keep this option here so I can force the monitor to stay on when working on something like a gimbal. I like to have my custom memory options available, so I can quickly say if I want to change my custom the custom dials we talked about earlier, I can change the settings on them there. 4-channel of audio monitoring. It just basically allows you to pick which audio channels you want to monitor, and from there we have record media settings, front curtain shutter, sensor cleaning, and that's it. That's what I keep on my quick menu. And for those of you who want to like slow down and dial or set anything like this in, you should be able to pause the live stream or re-watch it at a later date and be able to go in and do that. So if I go a little quickly on something, just know that you can always rewind it and pause it and go from there. So now that you know what the quick menu is, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into the first menu option, which is going to start with image quality. So when we get to image quality, we're going to go in here and talk about the different settings. And like I said, this is going to be a little bit of a lengthy live stream today, and this is why. I had to get a drink there because there's a lot of menu options. So grab yourself some coffee and get ready, because here we go. So right off the bat, you have your file format. Like I said earlier, like to shoot on XAVCI. If I'm shooting in 4K, it's XAVCI. If I'm shooting in HD, it's XAVCI. XAVCI is going to eat up the most amount of memory space on your card. So if you're worried about eating up memory space, these are not the codecs to shoot in for you. However, you're going to get the best image quality out of these codecs, and you're also going to have the best performance when editing on your computer with these codecs. So I like XAVC-SI, and I use the 4K and the HD. I typically shoot everything in 4K. I very rarely have a need to go to HD, but if you wanted to shoot something at like 240 frames, that's when I would do that. Up above that, you have XAVC-S 4K and XAVC-S HD, and then you have the XAVC-HS. These are just going to be more of your compressed codecs that are going to be a lot more efficient on card space. And again, if you are working with SD cards, it's going to allow you to do things like 4K 120 with an SD card. But these are some of the file formats that are going to not be able to retain as much of a bit rate, so that means your image quality could take a little bit of a hit. And again, it's going to be really hard on your computer. So if you are shooting an event like a TED Talk, maybe you're shooting a fishing show and you've got to record hours and hours and hours of footage and you're worried about card space, then I would recommend shooting in one of these XAVC-S or HS types. If you are not concerned about file space, you want the best image quality and the best editing performance, XAVC-SI is the way you want to go. Let's go into menu settings or movie settings. Under movie settings, this is where you're going to find your frame rates. As you can see here, even though I'm in 4K, you don't see 4K 120. You only see it go up to 60. That's because in 4K in XAVCI, the only way to achieve 4K 120 is in the S&Q mode. That's why it's not under a normal frame rate option. So under normal filming, 4K 24, 4K 30, 4K 60 are your options. And then down below it where it says record setting is where you would choose to pick your bit rate if you want to shoot, or your bit depth, your color depth if you want to shoot in like 8-bit or 10-bit or something like that. As you can see here, I like to shoot in the 422 10-bit. Why not? It's there. Let's use it. And if you'll notice where it says 240M, that means it's going to be shooting 240 megabits per second for 24 frames. If I was to change this from 24 to say 60, you'll notice it says 600. So if you ever want to know what your bit rate's going to be, just know that it's going to be, just take your frame rate when shooting an A7SIII and add a 0, and that's your bit rate. So that's a nice little nifty trick for those of you who want to know what your bit rate is. Most of you probably don't care. I'm the kind of guy who does care about that kind of stuff, but I'm kind of nerdy when it comes to things like that. Matthew asked, does the S3 support 4-channel audio like the FX3 does via the additional XLR accessory handle? As far as I'm aware, yes it does. That was one of the things that Sony was touting with the A7S III when they came out with it. Luke asks, can you use APS-C lenses on the A7S III? You can. So here's the thing about the APS-C lenses, Luke. If you use an APS-C or crop lens, for those of you who don't know what APS-C means, it essentially means that, or when you do work with it on the A7S III, what you're going to have happen is, first off, you're going to be limited to HD. You cannot shoot on the A7S III 4K in crop mode. The reason is because it's a 12 megapixel camera. If this was the A1 or the A7 III, you could shoot 4K in crop because there's enough resolution on the sensor to handle it. This camera cannot do that because it only has 12 megapixels, but it can shoot APS-C in HD mode. So if you're okay with shooting in crop mode in HD, go for it. If you have to or want to shoot 4K, forget about it. There is one workaround where you can use clear image zoom to crop in and digitally, so you could shoot in 4K full frame and crop in with the digital zoom to make up for the crop lens and be able to shoot technically 4K with an APS-C lens. But I don't like clear image zoom all that much. I used it when I was in Pakistan. It was the first time I used it because I left my FS7 at home and I took my A7SIII that I had at the time with me, and I used clear image zoom to get closer shots of Urials and Ibex. And my issue was sometimes the footage would look great and I couldn't tell I was using clear image zoom. It just looked awesome. And sometimes it really messed up the image quality. I don't know when it's going to look good or when it's not going to look good, so I just avoid it altogether. And I only use clear image zoom as an absolute last resort. Otherwise, I stay away from it. So if you're going to use APS-C lenses on this camera, you can just stick with HD and be good with that. So now that I answered that question, let's go into the next round of settings. We have S&Q settings. This is basically where you're going to dial in when you go to S&Q mode what you want your settings to be. You'll notice because we are in 4K that it tops out at 120. If we were in HD right now, this would top out at 240. You also notice how you can go below your normal filming rates, and this is if you want to do something like 1 frames per second or 2 frames per second, because maybe you want to do like stop motion or something. So you can do that for creative purposes. Some people do this for time lapsing. I don't see why. There's a built-in intervalometer for time lapses, so I would rather use that. But you can go below normal frame rates. But essentially how this works is when you want to use S&Q, you go to record frame rate and you type in the frame rate you want the camera to record to. This is not the frame rate it's filming at, it's what it's recording it at. So if you want to shoot for TV, for instance, and you know that your TV network is set at 30 frames per second, but you want a shot in 120, you would set your recorded frame rate to 30 and then your S&Q frame rate to 120, and what would happen is it would film at 120 but write it to the card already slowed down to 30 frames per second. Most of my work is in 24 frames, so I keep that at 24 and shoot at 120 or whatever frame rate I want, and it automatically slows it down to 24 frames for me in camera. Sometimes I don't like that. Sometimes I want to film in 60 frames per second, for instance, in regular filming mode because I want the option to slow it down myself in post. I do that with wildlife a lot when I shoot a lot of my wildlife at 4K 60. I can play it back in real time and it looks okay, or I can slow it down, I get the choice. I would use S&Q mode only when I'm like wanting to show a client a shot slowed down and I'm like in the field and I want to shoot it in slow motion and show them what it looks like. That's when I'll use S&Q over regular filming options. Or if I want to shoot 4K 120, because again, like I said earlier, that is the only way to shoot 4K 120 on this camera. It is good to note that used to on Sony cameras like the A7 III, S&Q actually damaged the image quality. It was only with the A7S III and FX3 and the A1 that changed. The FS or FX line from Sony didn't suffer from that problem, but like the A7 III, for instance, and A7R III, if you shot in S&Q mode, the bit rate was much lower and your image quality dropped. But that is not the case in the A7S III. So if you've ever heard of that, where S&Q mode is a bad thing, it is not anymore. And then of course, here's where you can change your bit rates. Proxy settings. If you want to work with proxy files where you can record like 4K 10-bit on one card, but maybe an HD 8-bit low bit rate on another card, so you can edit with proxy files on your computer and then relink to the higher quality files later, you can do that here. Some people do that for an immediate backup, which I don't understand, because why would you want your backup to be a proxy file? But to each their own. Or some people do it if they just have a slower computer and they don't want to transcode to a proxy and they'd rather have it done in camera to a proxy. And if that's you, this is where you go to do that. Luke, when you were asking about APS-C shooting, this is where you'd go to turn that on or off. Also, Luke, if you shoot with an APS-C lens, and I meant to mention this earlier, if you're shooting photography, it drops from 12 megapixels full frame to like 4 or 5 or something like that. So if you want a much lower megapixel image, that's how you do that. And then lens compensation. So for those of you wanting to dial in settings, this is where you're going to want to take note here. Highlight this, circle this. If you're, well, I don't know why I say that. We're doing a live stream. Write this down or pick up your camera and change these settings immediately. And that is turn off shading compensation, turn off chromatic aberration compensation, and turn off distortion compensation. When I bought my A7R III, I was really upset with the photographs and some of the video shots I was getting from that camera, and I couldn't figure out why it looked so bad compared to my A7R II. They had the same sensor, but the newer version, the R3, looked terrible. And I spent like 3 months trying to figure it out, and one day I noticed that my shading, chromatic aberration, and distortion compensation options were on. And I was like, man, I don't remember keeping those on my R2. So I turned them off, and magically my images got everything back. I don't like having those compensations turned on because I find that it sometimes just doesn't work well with the camera, and you end up getting results that are subpar. I would recommend turning all of those off, and if you want to do any of those compensations, do them in post. Now that we've done that, let's go down to format. This is where you obviously would just format your cards. Nothing more to say there. Record media settings. This is where you can decide what card you want the camera to be recording to. If you look at mine right now, I have 2 empty CF Express Type A 160 cards in, and I have mine set to auto switch media on, recording mode standard, and prioritize slot 1. What this means is my camera is going to be recording to the slot 1, which on this camera is the top slot. And if I wanted to change it to slot 2 for any reason, I would go right there, and you'll notice at the bottom of the camera menu that it switched to card slot 2. If I wanted to go back to card slot 1, do that, boom, goes back up. When it says standard in recording mode, standard basically means that you're recording video clips and photographs to the same card. You can go in here and split them up and have them change it to where you're shooting maybe raw on one card for photographs, and then this HEIF, which is kind of like a new version of JPEG, to another card. Or maybe you want to have this menu option where video is on one and photo is on the other. You can sort those. I don't do that. I keep it on standard where everything records to the same card. And the reason I do that is because of this next menu option, which is auto switch media. Basically what this means is if card slot 1, whether you're shooting photos or whether you're shooting video, it automatically, when you fill it up, will switch to card 2 without skipping a beat. I used this just last week. Last Tuesday, I recorded like several hours worth of interviews on my FX6 and my A7S III, and I had auto switch media turned on, and when those cards filled up in the middle of the interview, I didn't tell them to stop. I just let it keep going because it automatically started recording in card slot 2, and if you in post take the end clip in card slot 1 and the beginning clip of card slot 2 and you combine them together, you won't even lose a single frame rate. It's amazing. So if you are recording a wildlife shot and you don't want to stop and record card slots or anything, just let it switch into the second card. That's what this does. Same thing with photographs. If you're shooting like burst mode or something, it will kick into card 2 automatically for you. And then you can hot swap and pull out card 1 and replace it with another one without ever stopping record. It's really, really nice. Next is Recover Image Database. If you have something where your card is not reading correctly and it's having a hard time because like maybe something in the file structure got changed and it's not reading it, this is where you can select to kind of recover that. And the display media info, basically it tells you if you click on that, it tells you how much footage or photographs or whatever image you're in or whatever mode you're in. It tells you how much you can store on your card. You can see right here that at 4K, shooting at 24 frames per second at 10-bit 422 and A7SIII, I can get an hour and 25 minutes on 160 gigabyte card. And so if you ever want to know how much footage or photographs you can get on your card, this is where you go to do that. Looks like I have some comments. Does S&Q record sound? Kyle asked that. I do not believe so. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty positive it does not. In fact, I know it doesn't. So if you want to record sound in S&Q, sound on like 4K 120, you need to use A7SIII, and you need to shoot 4K 120 continuous, non-S&Q if you want sound. That is a workaround. But if you shoot in S&Q, you will not have sound. Luke says, I was just curious for a power zoom lens purpose, but I can always use a wireless follow focus on a full frame lens. Luke, I don't know if you've ever looked at the Sony 28 to 135 lens. I have that here in my office. It has a really great power zoom lens. It doesn't have the longest focal length in the world, but it's a full frame lens, and it is a good option if you're interested. All right, let's get back to here. File settings. File settings basically allows you to dictate how you want the files to be written or saved on your card. You can change like the date and title, and you can even go in here and literally give titles to your cards. So that's pretty much all that's for. Next is shooting mode. Let me get a drink of water here. Under shooting mode, exposure mode essentially allows you to dictate if you want aperture or shutter priority or program auto, and you don't want any of this. So here's the thing, if you ever buy an A7S III and you're in movie mode and it's not letting you control things manually and it's auto adjusting like the exposure for you, this is how you fix that. So you would go into your menu, you would go to exposure mode under the video option, and again you do that right here under shooting mode. Go to exposure mode and switch that to M so you're on manual. You should do that. That should be the first thing you do when you buy this camera. Under that, these are just basically settings for those different SAP modes. And then under that, we have the camera setting, camera memory options. These are those custom 1, custom 2, custom 3 options on the dial wheel we talked about. And then you also have M1, M2, M3, and M4. Those write to your SD card. So 1, 2, and 3 will write to the camera, and M1, M2, M3, and M4 will write to your SD card. I don't like that because or your CF Express Type A card. I don't like that because I want it all to be saved to the camera always and not dependent on what card I have in. So I just save custom memory options to 1, 2, and 3, but that's where you do that. And then memory recall is if you did save it to an SD or a CF Express Type A card, this is where you would go and recall those and pull those up. Next, we have silent mode settings. Silent mode is basically when you are shooting photography, you can turn silent mode on or off, and basically what that does is it allows the shutter to be on or off. And I always, the noise, I like to keep it off, or on, I mean. Then you have release without lens, which basically is can you shoot a video clip if the lens is not on? I have that to disable because sometimes I may, I don't really want that as an option. If we go to audio recording is where you're going to set your audio settings. You can literally turn the audio recording on or off. And then audio recording level is literally the level. I have mine set to a custom button, but if you don't have it set to a custom button, this is where you'd go to change it. Audio timing or out timing, do you want it live or do you want it to lip sync? Leave it at live. Wind noise reduction, that only works for the internal microphone. I would suggest leaving that off. Most of you should not be recording into the internal microphone anyway. This stands for the multi-interface shoe audio settings. So if you had if you had the K3M or K2M plugged into your camera, giving you audio options. Excuse me one second, guys. I have someone that showed up. Hold on one second. I have someone at my door.
Hey.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, how you doing?
Doing good. I'm in a quick meeting, so can I keep this real brief?
Yeah, go for it. I'm just going to go take measurements for you.
Yeah, I'm really sorry, man.
You're good.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Sorry about that, guys. I have some guys looking at my fence to see about spraying my fence for me. Anyway, this is where you change the multi-interface audio options. Then you have audio level display, and that's whether or not you want to see your audio levels. Of course you do, so leave that on. This stands for basically time code. If you want to go on here and run time code with something, with a time, if you want to jam the camera or run this camera with, like I have a Sound Devices Mix-Pre 6.2. If I wanted to run time code with that and this camera, this is how you would set all that up. Most of you will never use time code, so that doesn't matter. I only use it for certain things, but sometimes it comes in handy. But for most of you, that'll be irrelevant. Image stabilization, standard steady shot. Basically, what this is this is your IBIS. Standard is normal, your normal axis, your normal IBIS, three axis IBIS inside the camera. Active is where it also not only uses IBIS, but it also adds and turns on a digital image stabilization, and it crops in slightly on your image, and in the field it actually is using kind of like warp stabilizer. It's actually really good. To my surprise, it's really good. I was shooting handheld in a plane, a small plane. It was the only way I was able to squeeze in with a camera for a commercial shoot I did last year, and it was really bumpy, and I had no way to bring a tripod or monopod or anything. So I turned on active, and it cropped in on the image slightly, but I handheld and got some awesome stabilized shots. So this is where you turn that on or off. I would recommend leaving it in standard most of the time, but if you just need some extra image stabilization, go to active. Don't use it all the time because it does crop in on your image and it could add a little warp or something. But if you need a trick up your sleeve and bumpy moments, that's where you can get an extra little bit of leverage. I will tell you this, if you are shooting on a tripod and you are shooting photos or video on a tripod and the camera is static and not moving, like an interview, turn steady shot off so there's no risk of the camera trying to stabilize a steady shot. That doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes it can drift if you're filming an interview and look weird. So just turn it off if you're filming like an interview or something like that, or if you're taking a still shot on a tripod. I would recommend turning it off. Steady shot adjust, auto or manual. Basically, if you are using a native Sony lens, leave it at auto and it will dictate what the focal length is and automatically tell the camera or the IBIS inside the camera how much to stabilize. A manual is if you are using a manual lens, a lens that does not have electronics, or maybe you are using an adapted lens that's not reading to the camera, and you still want image stabilization, you still can have it. You just have to go in and dial in your focal length and tell the camera what the focal length is, and it will adjust it for you. Most people are going to run native lenses, so auto will work. But if you're using like manual cinema glass and you still want image stabilization, this is where you'd go to get that. Zoom, this is where you can turn on some of these zoom options. I don't really fool with any of that. I would it's digital zoom. Basically, this is where you can get that clear image zoom I talked about earlier. I don't like using any of that stuff. I don't trust it, but if you just ever did want to try it out, that's where you'd go and get that. Shooting display. This is if you want like a grid for helping with things like lower thirds and stuff like that. I don't use that very often. You see right here, grid line type. This is where you can change what type of grid you want. I don't really like shooting with a grid. I don't like a bunch of junk on my screen, so I turn that off. Just all of those options I just kind of leave off there. Marker display. These are basically if you want like aspect ratio markers. Maybe you're going to maybe you want to shoot something for like, I don't know, TikTok or something, and you want to change the aspect ratio. It won't necessarily change the aspect ratio for you in camera, but what it does do is it puts up markers on the screen, which helps you frame up your shot. So when you go and post to set your aspect up, you'll know you'll have shot it right in the field. That's all that's for. I actually used that the other day on my shoot last week, because I know that everything we did they wanted to put on TikTok and Instagram, and they wanted it to be right side up, kind of like, you know, like a cell phone. So I did use it for that. That's kind of what those things are for, but most of y'all don't need to go through all that. Whew, there's a lot of stuff, guys. I told you. Now we're going to go to exposure. Under exposure, turn auto slow shutter off. Just turn it off. Exposure compensation. This is basically a way to do what we talked about on the dial, but in camera. That's where you would, if you want to do it in camera, that's where you do it. Metering. This is if you are using shutter priority or aperture priority like we talked about earlier, and you want to tell the camera how to read the exposure, this is where you do it. I leave mine usually at multimetering, and I do keep face priority on multimetering, and basically what that means is when the camera's reading the exposure of the scene, it will prioritize faces, which are usually the most important thing you want to expose for, and then spot, metering point, focus point, link. What this is if I'm shooting in something like aperture priority, and let's say I'm using a flexible autofocus point, and I put that autofocus point on something like a person's face, or maybe a particular picture on the wall or something small, it will focus and it will read the metering for what I'm focusing on exactly. So that's what that is. I like to leave that on because I want my metering to work with what my focus points are on. White balance, I have mine set to a quick button option in the camera, but if you wanted to adjust it through the menu settings, this is where you'd go. I would recommend on here leaving priority and auto white balance to standard. I don't use auto white balance for video, but I do for photography sometimes if I'm shooting on the move. And this basically tells the camera if you want it to really prioritize things, like if you want it to prioritize the white balance for ambient light, for instance, you could set that setting here. I would suggest leaving it in standard. And then shockless white balance, no need to go into that. There'd be a long-winded explanation. You can turn that off or keep it on 1, but it basically has to do with when it changes the white balance. Color tone. This, turn it off, turn it off, turn it off, turn it off. You do not want dynamic range optimizer on. It's grayed out for me because of the way I have my camera set up right now, but if yours is not grayed out, turn it off. You do not want that. It changes things, and even in raw files that you do not want it to change. Creative look, if it is an option for you, turn it off. You don't want it. Picture profile. Let's talk about picture profiles. Everybody likes to talk about picture profiles. I shoot with 2 and 2 only on this camera, so I'll keep it simple. The best way to get the best footage off of the Sony A7S III is to shoot in XAVCI codec like we talked about earlier, and shoot in S-Log3, S-Gamut3.Cine color mode. S-Log3 Gamma, S-Gamut3.Cine color mode. Sony themselves will tell you that they designed this camera to get its maximum output in this picture profile option. I shoot everything in log. If you are afraid of coloring log, don't. It is super, super easy. In fact, I can color log faster and easier than I can color or try to fix a baked-in picture profile. Log is easy. If you are afraid of log or if you don't know how to use log, go with to the Filming with Josh tab on Facebook, or go to Filming with Josh group on Facebook, go to the search bar, type in color grading log, and you will find a post that I made a while back that is a video of me demonstrating how to grade log, and it could not be easier. So if you want the absolute best out of this camera, shoot an S-Log3 S-Gamut3.mini, Cine, and leave all the other settings alone. Don't change anything else except for color phase. I adjust the color phase to +2 simply because the FX6 and the A7S III share the exact same sensor, but they have two different processors in them. So even though they have the same sensor, the image straight out of the box doesn't look quite identical. It's close, but it's not quite identical. Gerald Undone did a really great demonstration on how if you change the color phase to +2, that the A7S III will match in magenta better to the FX6. So I suggest if you are going to work with an FX6, change this to +2. The reason why you want to do it on the S3 and not the FX6 is because the FX6 should be your A cam. So always adjust your B cam to match your A cam if possible. So this is where I would make that one adjustment. And then the only other adjustment is I like to turn my detail to -5, simply because the camera can look a little over sharp, which kind of makes it look fake and not as cinematic. So change the detail to -5. Outside of that, leave everything else alone. Like, don't go in here and change any color depth options. Don't change your saturation. Don't change the knee. Leave it at auto. Leave your black gamma right in the middle with a level of 0. Don't adjust any of that stuff. Just S-Log3, S-Gamut3.Cine, +2 on color phase if you're working with an FX6, and detail to -5. So that's picture profile 1 for me. Picture profile 2 is S-Cinetone. S-Cinetone is fantastic. I shot some projects the other day for a client where I don't edit the footage. I usually edit everything, but I have 1 or 2 clients that have in-house editors, and they contract me as a shooter. And they don't like to do much color grading. They just like to throw everything together. So I usually shoot with a baked-in picture profile. I recently sent them some S-Cinetone footage off my FX6 and A7S III, and they were absolutely blown away. The reason is because it looks phenomenal. Out of all the cameras I've ever worked with, Canon, Panasonic, Sony, any of those cameras, Blackmagic, this is the best looking out of the box picture profile I have ever seen, and my clients were blown away by it. It's actually what I'm live streaming this in right now, so I think it looks really, really, really good. So if you want to work with S-Cinetone, you want your black level to be at 0, your gamma at S-Cinetone, your black level range to middle and 0, or black gamma range to middle and 0, your knee at auto. All this stuff is just the same standard stuff we talked about earlier. Color mode S-Cinetone, saturation 0. Again, I adjust my color phase to +2 so it better matches my FX6. Color depth, again, don't change any of that. Detail, once again, -5. And that is my second picture profile option, and those are the only 2 I work in. So if I'm live streaming, or if I'm handing footage off to someone, or doing some kind of news or broadcast where I'm not going to be color grading it and I need a baked in look, S-Cinetone all the way. For everything else, S-Log3, S-Gamut3.Cine. Now that we've covered picture profiles, let's go to zebra display. If you want to work with zebras, or zebras, depending on where you are, this is where you would turn them on or off and their intensity. Hopped out of my menu there. After that, let's go to autofocus, manual focus. I need to get another drink of water here because I am doing a lot of talking. All right, under autofocus, manual focus, you will see where we have a lot of different focus modes. We'll start with AFC or MF. Basically, it's continuous autofocus or manual focus. It's pretty straightforward. Let me hop back in there. The autofocus transition speed. This is how fast it transitions from one subject to another. there is no right or wrong setting here. It just depends on what you're doing. So if you need something to transition or rack focus or follow something really quickly, this is where you would turn your speed up. If you want it to be really slow, you turn your speed down. If you want it in the middle, you'd leave it at 5. It just depends on the shot. And then this is your sensitivity. How sensitive do you want it to be? Do you want it to, every time something comes in front of what you're filming, do you want it to be sensitive and change to that immediately? Or do you want it to kind of let something come in front of the frame and move away and only change if something stays in front of the frame? That changes how responsive it is. These two settings all dictate on what you're doing. I think straight across the board, you can leave this at 5, but if you want both of them at 5, but if you want to, for a specific shot, adjust the sensitivity or transition speed, this is where you would do it. Focus area. I'm typically in a wide focus area. It means that the camera is going to be using the entire frame to change the autofocusing, to be searching for autofocus. But sometimes I use these other ones. Zone is essentially, you have this box that you move to different zones. And there are 9 zones. You have top left, top middle, top right, middle, middle left, lower middle, lower right. And what this does is it's basically saying, hey, camera, you can focus on anything that comes in this zone or this box. That's what that means. Center fix is just center. Everything that's right in that red box in the center, that is center fix. Next we have spot for small, medium, or large. I like medium. Sometimes I'll go to small if I need to be really, really, really small and want to fine tune my focusing point. And sometimes I'll go to large if I'm trying to track something really fast. But essentially, you use your joystick and you move this box around. Notice how it's focusing on my wall back there. But if I move this over here to the hard drive, it will try to focus on the hard drive. Now my lens is too close, so it won't focus on it because I'm too close to my hard drive. But you get the point. This little box changes where the camera's trying to focus on. So that's essentially what that does. You can press the joystick in the center and it will always go back to the center of the frame. Next is expandable spot. It is basically the same exact thing. It's just there's an additional little box around, a bigger box around the small box. And what that's saying is you're wanting the camera to focus on what's inside the little box, but if it can't grab focus on what's inside the little box, then we'll allow the camera to go a little bit further into the bigger box. That's what that means. So I use all these. If I'm shooting wildlife photography, I'm a lot of times in spot focus, so I can put it right on the animal and what part I want it to be on. If I'm doing gimbal shots, a lot of times I'm on center fix. I use zone if I'm like filming an interview and I have a stationary subject and I want to make sure it's only focusing on the area that person's face is in. And then I use wide for everything else. That's focusing areas. Focus area limit. Basically, this is, do you want more or less options when you are in your menu? That's literally all it is. If you only want to switch between a few of these, then uncheck some of the ones you're not interested in using. If you want all the options available, then leave them all checked. That's literally all that does. Focus area color. I have mine to red. That's the red box that you saw, but you can choose white. I like red a lot better. That is a newer thing Sony finally started offering. They used to be white only. Red is way easier to see in my opinion. I like red. This is just basically, do you want, if you're holding your joystick, I'll show you, because you may not understand what this means, but let me change my focus to center fix, or not center fix, to flexible spot. Basically what this option means is, and again, it's called, just so you can see it, I cannot talk, circulating of focus point. And what this means is, do you want it to stop at the edge or do you want it to, if you're holding to the right, do you want it to hop all the way back over and just circulate? You see what I'm saying? See how it's circulating there? If you want it to, when you're all the way at the edge, to stop and not go to the left side of the frame, you would change it from circulate to do not circulate. So that's what that means. Autofocus frame move, just leave this on standard. That's not something you need to worry about. So face and eye autofocus. One of the best things about the A7S III is that it has eye autofocus. And it does it not only in photography, but now also in video. I've shot hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of interviews on my FX6 and A7S III using face and eye priority. And basically what this means is it is going to focus on the person's eyes. And I do this in interviews all the time where you'll see this little box around the eyeball of who I'm filming the interview of, and it is extraordinary. It works really, really, really well. In fact, I'm gonna pull my camera up here and try to see if I can show you on my FX6 screen. I don't know if you can see this or not, but you should be able to see a little eyeball thing, a little box going around my eye. And that's because my FX6 is using eye autofocus right now, and that shows that it is using a little box around my eye in video real time. If I move forward, it's staying on my eye, and if I move backwards, it's staying on my eye. I'm probably making all of you sick, so I'm going to quit doing this and go back into the menus. But eye autofocus is incredible. I see no reason to turn it off. Face, eye, subject, human or animal. You have to pick between human or animal because the camera has to know what it's looking for. Right or left eye select. Do you want it to automatically select, or do you want to pick which eye it wants to focus on? And this is, do you want this option, the iframe display, do you want the little box around the eye to show on your screen or not? And do you want to register faces? That if you are shooting something like a wedding and you want to register the bride's face and let the camera literally, it's weird, it like looks at her face and remembers it. So when you are shooting video or photos, it will always look for her face out of everyone else's face. That's what that does. It's a pretty cool little nifty feature. Our cameras are getting really smart here. Focus Assistant. Focus Mag. Basically, if you are in manual mode and you have a button on your camera set for Focus Mag, it will allow you to zoom in digitally. This isn't going to record it zoomed in. It's just going to pop in to tell you whether or not you are in focus. It just makes it easy to see. I have mine set to a custom option or a custom button, so I can do that to check my focus in the field really quick. But this is where you can do it in the menus if you don't have your custom buttons set for that. Focus, magnifying time. Do you want it to have no time limit where it always stays zoomed in until you tell it to leave, or do you want it after 2 or 5 seconds to jump back to full frame? That's what that does. Initial focus mag, do you want it to go in 1 times or 4 times? I leave mine at 1, but you could go to 4, which basically means it crops in a lot. I don't really like that. I like to keep it at 1 because I don't want it to go in so far that I can't tell what I'm looking at. Peaking display, if you are in manual mode, you'll want peaking on. Peaking helps you pull focus. It is the outline of what it is that you have in focus. That's all it is. I like to use red as my peaking color, but you have the option to use yellow, blue, or white in addition to red. And I like red. I can see red the best. A lot of people swear about white, but red is what I like. Peaking level, I like to keep in mind at mid, but sometimes if it's reading too much in the frame and kind of getting in my way, I'll switch it to low, or if I can barely see it, I'll switch it to high, but mid is typically where I leave it. All right, some of this stuff is not as important to go into, but I guess I'll go ahead. Playback target is which card slot are you wanting the camera to read the playback from. This is if you're reviewing your footage or your photographs. Do you want it to review footage or photographs from card slot 1 or 2? That's where you select that, and as you can see, I have nothing to review because these are empty cards. Let me go back here. Whoa, why did I do that? Kick me back. So that's what that means. And then view mode is, do you want it to sort it by date or by folder or by movie only? That's kind of where these options are. So that's what that does. If we go to magnification, this is basically just settings for zooming in on your image when you're reviewing it. This is basically, do you want to like rate your photos or videos, clips by like which ones you like best and which ones you don't. I do that when I'm shooting photography. If I have a keeper shot, I'll set a rating on it to like 5, and then when I'm in Lightroom will show me the rating in person so I can actually see what photos I rated in the field. And you can also lock and protect your images as well. Delete, do you want to go in, if you have something you want to delete, you delete it here, or you can hit the trash can button like we talked about. And this is, do you want it to ask you basically to confirm deletion or not? If you want to quickly delete stuff, you can turn this off, but I recommend leaving cancel first on. It basically just every time you delete, it says, are you sure you want to delete? And if you say, and it will pop up on cancel first as the default option, or delete first. I leave it at cancel, so if I accidentally hit the delete button and that option pops up, it defaults to cancel and I have to switch it to delete first. So I have to be real intentional about deleting something in camera. That's why I leave it at cancel first, so I don't accidentally hit the button and hit delete. You know what I mean? Edit is basically allows you to kind of do some basic editing to your photos. You can rotate them, you can copy them. You can take photo captures out of video clips. So if you filmed something and you got a really cool shot, you want to turn it into a still shot, you can do that. This is basically options if you want to do something other than JPEG. This is actually a really cool new file type, and it's going to become the standard over JPEG at some point, but this is the option to choose that if you want. It's not really worth going into any more than that. Viewing, this is just viewing options like playback speeds and continuous play and stuff like that. And then you have more playback options that, again, we don't really need to go into all of this. Some of this you can just figure out on your own, but it's just all about the playing back. All right, now we are in the network settings where we have transfer remote as the first option, control with smartphone. I like to keep this on, and the connection basically allows me to find my phone via Wi-Fi, and I can take my phone, scan that QR code if you have the Sony Play Memories app, and basically it pulls up your camera on your phone, and you can see what your camera sees. Kind of like a remote monitor. There's a slight lag, but it's not bad, and you can also control the camera. So if I'm shooting multi-camera interviews and I want to control the other cameras by myself, but do it from where I'm sitting, like if I'm behind my FX6 but I want to look at what my A7S III is looking at, I can pull that up and control start and stop and settings like exposure and review clips all from my app. It's really, really cool, and of course it's a monitor as well, so that's really neat. Let me turn that off there. So that's what control with smartphone does. Used to, I would keep this off unless I wanted it on, because it would, leaving the Wi-Fi on would kill your battery on Sony's older cameras. The batteries are so good now, I just leave it always on. I don't have it always connected, I just leave it always on as an option. Send to smartphone, basically you select this and you hit select on device or on smartphone itself, and basically it just is sending photos or video clips to your phone. That's really all it does. View mode is, wait, whoa, what is going on here? Sorry guys, I'm not trying to make you sick. It just kicked me out. That's all that is. Sending target, I would leave this as original only. Basically this is, do you want it to send a full-size image or a proxy or both? I just leave it as original. If I'm going to send it to my phone, I want it to be the full-size image. Some of this other stuff like connection during power off, I leave that off. The transfer function, I don't really do a whole lot here. I just kind of leave it how it came. PC remote function, I'm not really doing much with the PC, so I leave that how it came. Remote control through Bluetooth. If you want to use Bluetooth instead of Wi-Fi on your phone, this is how you can do that. So that's what all that does. Location info link. Do you want this to basically connect to your phone and use your phone's GPS to say where on the camera you are and record that GPS location into your photo or video clips? That's what this does. So if you're off in some really cool place in Alaska and you want your phones to send GPS coordinates to your footage or your photos, so that when you're home and you're reviewing your photos, you can literally look at the coordinates of every photo you shot, so you know where you were every time you shot a photo. That's what this does. It's kind of a cool option. I don't really, sorry guys, I keep jumping out of my menus here on accident. I don't really use that very much, but if you wanted to, there it is. Wi-Fi, this is just stuff for accessing Wi-Fi. If you want to connect your camera to Wi-Fi for any reason, sometimes you want to connect it to Wi-Fi to do transfers to a computer. Sometimes you'll do it for updates. There's a variety of reasons, but that's where you go to do that. Bluetooth, these are just Bluetooth options for controlling with your phone or pairing with your phone. And these are all just more network options. Again, airplane mode, I leave it off because the battery life is really good. There's no reason to turn it, turn airplane mode on, in my opinion, and everything else is just all about networks and stuff. Nothing we need to go into. Area, date, language is obvious. Do you want it to be in English or Chinese or something else? Date, time setting is just, when you first buy the camera, you have to dial all this in. Is it daylight savings on or off? What's the date, time, date format? That's what all that is. What area you're in? That's all that. NTSC or PAL. Basically, if you are in Europe, you can switch this to PAL. If you are in America, keep it on NTSC, and that will give you the correct frame rate options for where you're at. Setting reset, if you want to reset all the settings on your camera. And then this is a really cool option. It's called save load settings. And basically what this does is if you want to save all of your settings, you've dialed in your camera, and you don't ever want to accidentally lose your settings in an update, or maybe you got to send your camera off to get it worked on, and you don't ever want to lose your settings because it's a lot of settings to go through, as we all know. This is where you save them. You can save them to an SD card or a CF Express Type A card and have them saved. And if you want to load them up, you go to load. I don't have a card in right now that has these saved, but I have one that has my settings saved on it. And you would go to load and you'd pull it up and be able to look at or pull up your old saved settings. Another reason to use this is if you want to give all of your settings to someone else. Or maybe you're renting another one of these cameras, another A7S III, and you want to duplicate the settings on it. You can literally save your settings from this camera, take the card out, put it in your rented camera, and load them, and your rented camera will now match identically your settings on this camera. So it's a really nifty tool for saving and loading all of your camera's settings. Operation customization. This is where you go in and set all your custom keys. What's really interesting about the A7S III, unlike Sony's older mirrorless cameras, is that this camera has the ability to set custom buttons based on if you're in photo mode, video mode, or playback. So you can have custom buttons for depending on the mode you're in. The reason why you'd want this is, let me hop back out of here. The reason why you'd want this is, let's say we were in custom video buttons, okay? And so this is the wheel. I told you earlier that I set my wheel to ISO, right? And then I have my peaking display. This is how I keep my custom button 2 as peaking display. I have focus hold for custom button 3. For custom button 4, I have APS-C or full frame. For 5, I have my focus areas. For 6, I have my touch operation select. That's if I want my touch screen to be on or off. For like touch to focus, things like that. Sometimes I'll turn it off if I don't want to accidentally change something. Focus standard for custom key 1. The joystick, if I'm selecting in or out, it's autofocus or manual focus select toggle. It just changes between autofocus and manual focus depending on, if I press the joystick in. And I have white balance set to the wheel 3, to wheel 4. On wheel 3, I have gamma display assist. That's basically if you're shooting in log, it puts color on the screen. So instead of looking at black and white footage, you're looking at colored footage. Audio record level to 5. So if I want to change my audio levels, I hit down and that's my audio levels. Movie setting, I leave it on button number 1, which is the red movie button. Focus mag on number 2. Focus hold on the lens. If you have a lens with the focus hold button, you can change that to whatever setting you want. I keep it at focus hold. Now here's the thing. Let's take a look at this real quick. I am in the movie custom keys, and I want to have, let's just look at option number 5, audio record level. Well, I want that custom option when I'm shooting in movie mode, or if I'm setting my custom settings to custom 1 movie mode. And the reason is because if I'm filming, I want to have quick access to my audio record levels to change the level of my audio. So I hit down on number 5, the down key on my wheel, and I can change my audio levels. Well, if I'm shooting photographs, there is no audio. So I don't want to waste that key, that custom option, when I'm shooting photographs. All right, I would rather have a photo related option, not a video option. And that's what's cool about the A7S III, is that it also has custom keys just for photo mode. So if you're in photo mode, you can have different custom options. And if you'll look on mine, for that same option that we were at earlier, which was audio, number 5 on the wheel, I have it to switch on photo mode between silent mode and not silent mode. So sometimes if I want to have silent mode turned on, if I'm taking photographs and I don't want people to hear me, or maybe I'm doing a time lapse and I don't want to wear the shutter out and I'd rather use an electronic, the electronic mode instead of the click shutter mode, I'll switch to silent mode on. Well, that's something that's only related to photography, not video. So rather than have the wheel number 5, the down arrow on the wheel, be set to audio, which makes no sense for photography, I have it set to the switch silent mode. And so that allows me to be able to have different custom keys depending on whether I'm in photo mode, playback mode, or video mode, which is really handy. So you can have quick keys depending on what you're doing, what mode you're in. So for those of you interested, I went through my video ones. I'll go through my my photography settings. I have ISO, AEL toggle, registered autofocus area toggle, APS-C full frame, focus area, touch operation select, focus standard, AF/MF selector toggle, drive mode. Again, this is I had gamma display assist on video, but for here it's drive mode. Then white balance, switch silent mode, movie shooting mode, focus magnifier, and focus hold. So those are my custom settings for photography. And the reason why I have the movie setting there is if I want to shoot a quick video clip while I'm shooting photos. And then for my custom keys for playback, I have select playback media, protect, send to smartphone, photo capture if I want to take a screenshot of a video I'm reviewing, and rating if I want to rate my photos. So those are all the custom keys that I have set up. Earlier I said that there's a quick menu called the FN menu. There's an FN button on your camera, you press it and a short menu pops up. Here you can set what you want your custom FM menu options to be. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but for those of you who are interested, these are the options I have for my FN menu settings. So if you want to copy the same settings I have, these are what my settings are. And you'll notice that there are 2 function menus, because just like the custom keys, the FN will be different in photo mode than what it is in video mode. So for photography mode, you could see I have focus and metering mode and flash photography or flash mode, ISO auto and peaking display and peaking level and raw, or what file type essentially I want to shoot in. All of that is photography related. But when I'm in video mode, my FN mode is a little different. I have things like S&Q frame rate options, or things like the autofocus transition speed. So these are things I want in video mode. So in the function menu, you can set that based on whether you are in photography or video. Different set for still or movie. This is literally what we just talked about. Is do you want for your your options? Do you want them to be a little different based on still or movie mode? Display. This is what you want showing up on the back of your monitor or your viewfinder. I'm under the monitor one right now. I like to have histogram, level, and that's it. So when I'm switching between different monitors, I'm switching between histogram and level, and that's it. And I do the same thing with my viewfinder, histogram and level, and that's it. So if I go here, if you look, I can switch between, I don't know why I'm struggling here. Here we go, display. I can switch between histogram or level. Histogram or level. So I only want those 2 because I don't want to be cycling between, histogram, level, for viewfinder, monitor off. I don't want all that stuff. I just want it to just be, those be the only options. And that's what it is. So it's the same thing on Finder as it is monitor. Record with shutter. I said earlier that you can set the camera to record with video with the shutter button if you want. I keep mine off. And the zoom, ring, rotate is basically if you're working with a certain type of lens. I won't go into that. My dial settings, these are where you switch if you want the front dial or back dial to do certain things. I keep all those blank. Dial setup, do you want your front dial to control f-stop and the back to control shutter speed, or vice versa? And in what direction do you want it to change? That's where all that is. Those are where those settings are. so you can see here, this is where you want you to dictate whether you want the front to be f-stop or shutter speed and whether you want the back to be f-stop or shutter speed. So you choose between which one you want, and those are your dials on the camera. And then here it's, do you want right to change your f-stop up or change it down, or do you want right to change your shutter speed up or down, or do you want it to be backwards? And that's where you select that. I leave mine at normal. The dial EV compensation is basically, do you want either of those dials to affect the EV compensation? I leave it to off. That's what the wheel's for. That's what I use it for. These are things that have to do with lenses. I wouldn't touch any of that. Touch operation, I keep mine on, but I can also go in and quickly turn it back off with a quick key. Again, I said earlier, sometimes you may want it off and sometimes you may want it on. It just depends. Touch sensitivity. How sensitive do you want it to be to your finger touch panel, or pad? Is basically, do you want to choose between the whole entire screen or a portion of the screen? And if you go into these settings, like the operation and vertical orientation, I'll leave that on. Touch position mode, I leave that to relative position. Operation area, I leave it on the right corner of the screen. Basically what this means is if you are filming or shooting photographs and you want to adjust your focusing point with the screen while you have the camera up to your eye, you can literally put your finger on the screen and adjust the autofocusing points. And this allows you to use either the whole screen or just a portion of the screen, and I have it to set to just a portion of the screen so my nose is not accidentally changing things. So that's all that is. All the rest of this stuff has to do with your viewfinder and monitors. I keep my viewfinder magnification to standard. I keep my display quality to high because I want to have the best looking display I can. And I keep my finder frame rates to standard. You can change it to high frames per second. This is photography related, but I leave mine at standard. These are more time code settings and options. Gamma display assist. Earlier I said if you're shooting in log and want color, you can turn that on or off. I'll show you what that looks like. So here you can see, let me go and point my camera at my Sockler tripod. We're in log and there's not a lot of color, but if you want to see what it would look like with color, you can turn gamma display on and it would show color. It's not going to work really well for me right now because I have the monitor plugged up, but if I did not have the monitor plugged up, I could turn gamma display on or off and it would change the color, but again, or add color or take it away. But because I have a monitor plugged up, it's not letting me do that correctly, but that's what that does. Let's go back into the menu here. Gamma display assist type. Do you want it to give you like S-Log3 to Rec 709 or S-Log2 to Rec 709? This is where you would adjust those things. Remain shoot display, don't worry about that. Auto review is basically when you're shooting photos or video, do you want it to pop up and automatically review it and display it as soon as you're done recording or taking the photo? The answer is no, you do not want that. That would be terrible. It would just get annoying. Power save start time. When do you want the camera to go to sleep? I set mine to 5 minutes, but you can set it to a longer period or shorter period of time if you want. So my camera, if I don't touch it for 5 minutes, it goes to sleep. Auto power temp off. Basically, how do you want the camera to be with temperature? If you leave it to standard, it won't necessarily overheat, but if the camera gets hot, it may shut down. Just as or warn you, just as a safety precaution. I leave mine to high so that my camera never ever turns off or does anything weird with overheating or with temperature. And there's really no reason or documented reason why not to leave that at high. Leave it at high. And basically, if you leave it at high, you don't ever have to worry about this camera overheating. It just doesn't suffer from overheating problems. So turn it to high, so if it gets hot, it will keep filming and won't turn off for any reason. Sound options. These are your volumes for your volume settings for your headphones. This is your 4-channel audio monitoring. I mentioned that earlier because I have this set to my quick menus. Just basically, what channels do you want your headphones to monitor? So you can pick what channels your headphones are monitoring, and then you can pick your volume settings for your headphones. I keep mine around the middle so that I'm just having my headphones monitor right in the middle. Middle, audio signals. Do you want your camera to ding and make noises when you go through your menus or turn it on or turn it off? I don't like that. I don't want my camera to make any noises, so I turn it off. Let's go USB connection. Leave it to mass storage. It's just basically if you hook your camera up to the computer with a USB cable, it will allow it to access mass storage. It's an explanation that I don't really feel like I need to go into right now. I keep these settings to multi and power supply to on. Power supply just means, will you let your camera accept an outside power source? And the answer is yes, you want it to. Because what if you want to do like a really long time lapse and you're out in the middle of nowhere and you want to get this really epic sunrise and you know your battery life is good, but you want to give it some extra power. You can hook up a power brick to your computer via USB-C and turn this USB power supply option on, and it will allow your camera to be powered by USB. Then we have the HDMI resolution. I leave it to auto. HDMI output settings. These are just basically if you're going to use a monitor or a RAW recorder, these are your settings for those different things. I feel like I don't really need to go through all that today. HDMI info display. This is how we are seeing all of this today. If I turn this off, you'll notice on the live stream that you can no longer see my menu. But I want it on so we can see my menus. So this basically allows the monitor, which in this case the live stream is kind of a monitor, this allows us to see what I'm seeing. And that's why you can see my menu options today. Where you might use this in a real world video perspective is if you are hooking an external monitor up to the camera, you can decide, do I want to see my menu on my external monitor, or do I simply want the external monitor to only show me what I'm looking at in terms of what the camera's looking at? And that's how you turn that on or off. Control for HDMI. Do you want to be able to control your camera through HDMI so monitors can start and stop record, like A7SIII recorders can start and stop record from the monitor if you have this option on, so you can start and stop record on your camera with this option if you turn it on. This is the last page, guys. Video light mode. I leave it to power link. That's just basically if you have a video light that works with Sony's hot shoe. IR remote control, I have that to off. Sensor cleaning. If you want to clean the sensor of your camera, you got a little bit of dust, take your lens off, hit enter, and it will shake the sensor and kick a lot of that dust off. It's a good way to clean your camera. It will automatically turn the camera off for you, so you'll have to turn the off switch off, put your lens back on, turn your camera back on, and it will now be clean. Auto pixel mapping is just basically keeping clean pixels if you have a dead pixel on your screen. That's all that kind of stuff has to deal with. So just kind of leave all that stuff where it says this. If you want to do pixel mapping to help look for dead pixels, that's where you'd go to do that. And version is just your software version for your lens and your camera. So if you have a lens and you want to see what version of software it has, you can plug it into your camera or put it on your camera, and this will tell me right now with my Zeiss 50mm f1.4 lens, it's telling me that I have version 2 software and that my camera is on the latest version of 2.01, which, by the way, if you do not have S-Cine tone as an option in your A7S III, it's because you are not on the current firmware. So if you want to have S-Cine tone as an option on your A7S III, you need to have the current version of the latest firmware in order to have it. I told you guys that was going to be a lot of stuff, and as you can tell, I was right. We did quite a long podcast here. In fact, how long has it been? I don't even know. I don't know how to look at that here on my Facebook streaming option, but point is, this has been a while. But there's a lot to go over. It's a big, extensive menu system, and I didn't dive into every single little option, but I covered the vast majority of it. The stuff that I thought was important. So if you're looking to dial in your camera, this is a good place to start. Yes, this is a long video, and for those of you who make it to the end or skip to the end, congratulations. But I felt like I needed to go all the way through it for those of you who are interested. So if you are really wanting to dial your camera in, here's that information for you. I hope it helps. One quick thing, I mentioned earlier there was a couple options in there for RAW recording for video. This camera can't output RAW. It has the capability of outputting up to 16-bit RAW, but all the recorders available today are only going to accept 12-bit for the most part. So if you get something like an A7SIII recorder, and you hook that up to this camera, you can record 12-bit RAW off this camera. It won't be 16, it'll be 12. Now, here's the thing. A lot of tests have shown that the 12-bit RAW is not perfect, and it really doesn't add much over log. So honestly, there's really not a reason to shoot RAW on this camera. You're not really, like, the 12-bit RAW is a linear 12-bit linear, so it's not the same thing as like 10-bit non-linear. So this camera, if you are recording in 10-bit 422 log, is actually not going to be all that different from 12-bit linear RAW. And in fact, the RAW has some complications. It's a little noisy. You have to clean it and post. It adds a lot of extra work. And by the time it's all said and done, you're not really gaining anything. So if you want to get the most out of this camera, learn to shoot and log. Learn to shoot and log and grade and log. You can grade with correction LUTs, or you can grade by hand, depending on how experienced you are. But if you want to get the best footage possible, shoot and log. Don't worry about RAW unless you're working with a director or a production company that specifically asks for it. But anybody who knows this camera inside and out will tell you that there's really no advantage of shooting RAW in it. Shoot and log, or if you're shooting something like a live stream like I am today, shoot an S-Anytone, or if you just don't want to edit or color the footage at all, shoot an S-Anytone. So those really ought to be the only two options. Don't worry about RAW on this camera. It's kind of a waste of money. In all honesty, you have to get the recorder, you have to get the drives for it, card readers, all this stuff, and you're not really gaining anything at all. So stick to log. It's really good. And if you are not getting good quality footage out of this camera, it's on you. I mean, really it is. I'm not saying that I'm some world-class colorist, because I'm definitely not. But I've seen some amazing stuff out of this camera. I have a really good editor that does a lot of work for me these days. He grades a lot of my log footage by hand, and it looks amazing. And it just boils down to you and what your skills and capabilities are. So if you have this camera and you are disappointed with the footage you're getting, it's got to be something you're doing, because this is a very, very capable machine. I hope you guys enjoyed this live stream as much as I enjoyed making it. My mouth is super dry. I did a lot of talking, but I hope that helps some of you out there who are interested in dialing in this camera. My Filming with Josh page, as many of you might have figured out by now, is not for the faint of heart. I don't do this stuff to look pretty or to have, you know, a bunch of views. My page, my podcast, all of it is for people who are serious about learning video and the business that goes with it. And hopefully this will be a demonstration of that, because this is a very long live stream, but it is a live stream for those of you who really and truly care about learning this camera. I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this. It will be on my page. I don't intend on deleting it, so if you ever want to go back and review it or share it, it'll be there. So thanks for listening, and I will hop off air and see you guys soon. Take care.